to collect participants as they come into the event. Thank you for joining us here at the Colorado School of Mines and the Payne Institute. We'll be beginning in about 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us at the Colorado School of Mines and the Payne Institute. We are still allowing participants to come into the meeting. Thank you for joining us, and we'll get started just in about 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started. Some participants are still joining, and I understand some will be joining through the Zoom call, and then some will be able to watch live as we stream on YouTube. Today, we're extremely pleased to launch the Global Energy Future Initiative at the Colorado School of Mines, and we are delighted and honored to have Dr. Daniel Yergin speaking with us on his new book, The Energy Map. I'm going to give Daniel's very impressive bio, followed by the president of the Colorado School of Mines, Paul Johnson, who will say a few words before Daniel's presentation. My name is Morgan Bazilian. I direct the Payne Institute of Public Policy at the Colorado School of Mines, and we're just thrilled to have Daniel with us today as part of an ongoing event series. Hope that you and families are safe and healthy, and we're grateful for your time in joining us today. Daniel Yergin is a highly respected authority on energy, international politics, and economics, and he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's the vice chairman of IHS Markit, one of the leading information and advisory firms in the world, with over 16,000 employees. His new book, the topic of today's event, is called The New Map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations. And it was named one of the best books of the year by both USA Today and NPR. Dr. Yergin is known around the world for his global bestseller, The Prize, which won the Pulitzer Prize and was made into an 8-hour PBS television series. His subsequent bestseller, The Quest, was described by the New York Times as necessary reading for CEOs, conservationists, lawmakers, generals, spies, tech geeks, and thriller writers. He has served on the U.S. Secretary of Energy Advisory Board under Presidents Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. In 2019, Yergin and former U.S. Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz led a major report called Advancing the Landscape of Clean Energy Innovation, which was conducted for the Breakthrough Energy Coalition led by Bill Gates. Dr. Yergin is a director of the Council on Foreign Relations and a trustee of the Brookings Institution, and he serves as on the Energy Advisory Council of the Dallas Federal Reserve. He's also on the advisory boards at the MIT Energy Initiative and Columbia University's Global Energy Policy Center. He holds a bachelor's degree from Yale University and a PhD from Cambridge University, where he was a Marshall Scholar. And most importantly, he holds an honorary doctorate from the Colorado School of Mines. We're thrilled to have him here, and I'll turn it over to you, President.
Great, thank you, Morgan. Hey, good morning, everybody. This is pretty exciting. This is the premier event of our new Global Energy Future Initiative. The goal of this initiative is to bring together the world's foremost energy thought leaders to discuss the complex issues associated with our shared global energy future. Mines, of course, is the natural choice for convening these types of discussions. For the past 147 years, we've been a pioneer at the frontiers of science and engineering. From locating and recovering Earth resources to energy production to environmental stewardship. Today, if you look really close at mines, you'll see we have world-class expertise across the energy system, from oil and gas to critical minerals to renewable energy to carbon capture, utilization, and storage to supply chain transparency to emissions monitoring to the circular economy and more. Our reach and reputation in the energy space has always been global, and many of today's leading energy voices have connections to mines. This is highlighted by the fact that people from over 40 countries have registered for today's webinar. Please keep an eye out for and participate in future programming. It's going to include events like convenings, discussions of cutting edge research, new partnerships, and more. They're all going to highlight the challenges and opportunities that are related to our shared energy future, and they're going to provide insights and robust data for decision makers. And with that, Mine's advertisement. Looking forward to listening to Dr. Yergin's presentation and discussion. I think it's going to be fascinating. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. And Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, Morgan. I'm very pleased to speak under the auspices of the Global Energy Initiative of the Payne Institute. The Payne Institute is a very important new innovation, relatively new innovation at Mines, and it represents really an extraordinary intergenerational engagement and contribution by the Payne family. And so I want to express appreciation to them and to the Payne Institute, as well as to Mines overall. As Morgan pointed out, this is my second time at Mines, although this is virtual. The first time was when I did the commencement in 2008. And then, as is clear today, as President Johnson pointed out, in its 147 years, Mines has made a continuing commitment to research and also to problem solving. And I'm struck just by my own knowledge of the energy industry, how decade after decade, graduates of Mines go on to help make sure that the world continues to go around. I was looking back at my graduation speech from 2008, struck by a couple of things. Back then, the world economy was $50 trillion. This year, it'll be getting close to $90 trillion. That's even after COVID, and that's only 12 years later. Secondly, when I was speaking, oil was $124 a barrel. And I think I looked at my remarks. I did say that the laws of economics have not been abolished. And I think we've seen those laws been working, both in terms of markets and also in terms of setting off innovation and stimulating innovation. In that speech in 2008, I made a bold prediction about Mines. I said that by the time somebody was delivering a graduation speech in 2013 or 2018, there would be electric charge points in the garage that people could charge their cars while listening to the graduation speech. President Johnson points out that I was a little ambitious in that prediction, but he does tell me that there are now 6 electric charging points in the garage at Mines. So the world does continue to change. And that's what I'm talking about today when I talk about the new map. It's about the new map of energy and geopolitics. And the whole idea came to me was initially looking at how trade routes had changed, how connections in markets had changed. And then as I thought about it more, and it all happened quite quickly, I'm struck that there are people from 40 countries on this discussion. And if you just think about how the energy positions of many of your countries have changed and the relationships have changed, it really comes home to you. But the broader point was how much has changed in terms of the interaction of energy and geopolitics and how it's really a new terrain. And what this book tries to do is really provide a map for that terrain, a map that gives us a sense of what 2021 will look like and beyond. Some of you have read The Prize, which was, in a sense, it's easier to write history because you know what happens and it's like a single narrative. The new map was challenging because I was writing about the past, the present, and the future. And as you go through it, you recognize how the great forces of technology, of politics, of economics change things. But you're also really struck by contingency. If a French captain in Indochina, stationed in Indochina, as the French Empire in Southeast Asia was called then, in 1933, had not planted flags on 9 basically uninhabited tiny islands in the South China Sea, leading a Chinese geographer to write a map or draw a map in 1936 about the South China Sea being part of China, today's contention between the US and China might not, in those waters, might not have occurred. If someone had not gone to a baseball game in Dallas in 1998, would the idea of shale just have faded away and there would not have been a shale revolution? Because the person heard at that baseball game happened to sit with somebody who happened to make a suggestion that he acted upon in the first successful shale well. Or if Elon Musk in the early 2000s had not had lunch at a fish restaurant in Los Angeles, the electric car might still be something just of interest to hobbyists. And Elon Musk, not so long ago, pointed out if he hadn't have gone to that lunch, there might not have been a Tesla. So, so it is this awareness of the big forces at work and the contingencies and the role of personalities. So what I've done in the new map is organize it around a series of maps, 6 of them. And that's what I'll talk about and make the key points now. The first map is America's map. And the shale revolution did happen. The impact was unanticipated. Even I think people, and there may be some on this call who were involved in it in the early days, did not think about what a strong impact it would have and what the far-reaching impact of the shale revolution would be. And we see it in every way. We see it in the US economy. We see it in job creation. We see it in the balance of payments. We see it in investment. And if I can have the first photo up for a minute. This is a photo of a Chinese chemical company paying for a new school in Louisiana as part of a multi-billion-dollar investment in a new chemical plant because of cheap shale gas being available. And it captures the enthusiasm of it. And I think I have to shut the curtains for a moment, which I'll do that because of the sound outside. But altogether, there have been over $200 billion of investment in new factories because of the shale revolution. It's also, so we can take that down now. But you can see the enthusiasm that sort of captured the enthusiasm of the shale revolution. Also, the shale revolution gave a very important flexibility to US foreign policy, which was not there before. And whether you agreed with Barack Obama's approach to Iran or Donald Trump's or what will be Joe Biden's, it wouldn't be possible without the flexibility that shale has given with the United States, having gone from importing 60% of its oil when I was at mines in 2008 to where it is today, where it's the world's largest producer of oil, largest producer of natural gas, and in fact, an exporter of both. Of course, we've heard people say that they want to ban shale, ban fracking. But I think if you say, what does that really mean if you ban it? What it really would be an import more oil policy, because there are 270 million cars in the United States that run on oil, and that oil would come from someplace. And I know the significance of it. In the book, I describe a scene where I was at a conference, St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and about 3,000 people in the auditorium. And this Vladimir Putin and Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, were on the platform together. And so they told that I had the opportunity to ask the first question. I was supposed to ask about diversifying the Russian economy. By accident, I mentioned shale, and Vladimir Putin started shouting, basically in my direction, about shale and how terrible it is and how polluting it is. And it became clear to me that the reason he didn't like shale for 2 reasons. One, because US LNG, natural gas, would compete with Russian gas in Europe. And he also sees shale as an adjunct to US foreign policy. So in a sense, that also drives home the significance of it. And sometimes I think the significance is just not understood in our own country. 8 presidents from the early 1970s have called for energy independence. We now have it, and there's a risk at least that we now take it for granted. So let me turn from America's map to the second metaphorical map, which is Russia's map. And as already indicated, energy plays a major role in every aspect of the Russian economy, in its foreign policy, in Vladimir Putin's great success in asserting Russia as a great power, even though it has an economy smaller than Italy's and only somewhat larger than Spain. But it is, although he said he doesn't like the term, an energy superpower. It's become also a source of discord. If I can have the second graphic put up. This is the Nord Stream 2 opening in 2008. That is the first pipeline that was laid under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany to bring gas. And you can see the enthusiasm there of Chancellor Merkel, then Russian President Medvedev, a whole host, the head of the EU energy minister, and this was considered a great thing. There will not be a celebration like that for the next Nord Stream 2 if it gets built, because in fact, that $11 billion project has been stopped about just when it was weeks away from completion by US sanctions because of the whole rising tension between the US and Russia over a whole host of things, but particularly beginning with Ukraine. And on and off, really, since it really hit me as I was writing it, since John Kennedy was president, the US periodically seeks to use sanctions and other pressure against Russian exports of energy. I think that when we see these sanctions that have been put on Nord Stream 2 today, that $11 billion project, because it's said that it's partly just in response to other things like cyber warfare, cyber attacks, but it's also based upon the notion that Russia would have leverage over Europe by exporting energy. But I think that misses the point that the Europeans have really built energy security into their pipeline system with flexibility. And also US LNG and LNG from Qatar, from Australia and other countries is also very much a part of the picture. So Europe has choices and flexibility that it didn't have before. I found myself reflecting on a comment that George Shultz made when he was Secretary of State in the 1980s. And he said, sanctions are a wasting asset. But one of the challenges, I think, for US foreign policy today is what are the other tools other than sanctions to have? And as the Biden administration thinks about its next policies, how it wants to work or not work or deal with Russia, let's put it that way, will it find tools other than just sanctions to achieve goals? And I think it shows up in many different aspects of foreign policy, but that's a very central one, and Nord Stream is a very vivid one. Something else that's happening of geopolitical significance is the deepening relationship between Russia and China. Vladimir Putin, actually, there's one occasion where he and President Xi of China were meeting in Central Asia, and Putin brought Xi's favorite ice cream, and they described each other as best friends. But this photo, I think, will really tell the story. If you can put up the next one, Morgan. This is I won't call it, well, it's sort of a cookout. And there's Vladimir Putin, President Putin, explaining to President Xi of China how you make Russian pancakes that are called blinis. And this was at a conference in Vladivostok, and they were obviously having quite a good time cooking up the pancakes, but they were cooking up something else as well, because at that same time, while this was going on, Chinese troops for the first time were participating in a massive Russian military exercises in the Far East. And that is really demonstrating the degree to which the two countries are increasingly become geopolitical partners. And the two presidents have met on innumerable times. There are many aspects to this relationship. It's a common rejection of what they see as a US-led international order. And I was struck that within days of the sanctions in December 2019 on Nord Stream 2, Xi and Putin had a very elaborate ceremony in which they started the flow of natural gas through this huge pipeline called Power of Siberia, carrying Russian natural gas into China. And it was a symbolic of that growing relationship. That relationship continues to deepen. There's talk here in Washington, D.C., where I am about, well, can you pry them apart? I think it's going to be very difficult. There are many aspects to that relationship, including Russia for the first time is selling its advanced weapons to China, no longer concerned about reverse engineering. But it is noteworthy to me that a relationship that was once based on Marx and Lenin is to some significant degree today based upon oil and gas. The third map that I talk about in the book is China's map. China has the 5th largest oil industry in the world. It's a very capable oil industry, active around the world. But China is sort of in the position that the US was back in 2008. The industry is simply not enough to support the extraordinary growth of that economy. China imports 75% of its oil, and China sees that as a strategic problem. And that actually gets us back to the map of the South China Sea, which is one of the maps that I have in the book. And as I say, it's a map that goes back to the 1930s, but it is a map that is very operative today because China claims about 90% of the South China Sea as Chinese territory. The other nations around it don't agree. The United States doesn't agree. Japan doesn't agree. Australia doesn't agree. But this 9-dash line map has become the center, as I said, of contention. And if I would say that the South China Sea is the most important body of water for the world economy, 1/3 of world trade passes through it. It's also right now the most dangerous because that's where the US and Chinese military are in most direct contact. And there have been a number of near collisions between US and Chinese naval vessels. Now, there's another map in the book, which is a map of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's effort to use their word connectivity of Central Asia, South Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa, into a network of trade and investment in which energy plays a very important role. And the president of Panama asked President Xi, he said, could Panama be part of Belt and Road too? And President Xi replied, yes, because it's about connectivity. And the Panama Canal is very much about connectivity in the world economy. I will tell you, we didn't include it for this, but if you look at the book, you'll see it. This is the only book on energy and geopolitics that includes a picture of Jackie Chan, the actor. Why is Jackie Chan there? Because he appears in a movie called Kung Fu Yoga, which you can watch on Netflix, about a Chinese and Indian archaeologists together, working together in the spirit of the Belt and Road on archaeological projects. So Belt and Road is not only economic, geographic, trade, investment, energy, it's also a cultural phenomenon. In fact, there's a Belt and Road, Silk Road film festival every year in China. There's a even larger issue that I talk about, and it is the single most biggest foreign policy issue that the Biden administration will confront. And that's a remarkable change in the relationship between the United States and China. In the new map, I call what existed from 2000 onward, even the late 90s, is the WTO consensus, the notion of China becoming what was called a responsible stakeholder in the international system. Well, here in Washington, the language has really changed. No one talks about engagement anymore. No one talks about a constructive relationship. They talk about strategic rivalry, great power competition, peer competitor, saying the US has never had a peer competitor before. To some, there are echoes in the language, and the Chinese have mirror image of it. It's the same language back. To some, this language echoes of the great power era before the First World War. And it really is a change. The US maybe most of you don't know, in this Wuhan with the flu, that the United States actually helped set up the Chinese CDC, the Center for Disease Control. And that was a very collaborative project. But we know today there's been no collaborative response, but rather contention in terms of dealing with COVID. And I think in a way that symbolizes a change. Where does this go? My first book that I wrote was on the origins of the Soviet-American Cold War. I never expected to be writing another book where I might be talking about new Cold Wars, but I've written a piece in the Atlantic about the ghosts who haunt the South China Sea, and we see it in trade, we see it in technology. Energy has been the one big positive in the relationship. The US is exporting significant energy, particularly LNG, to China, and that is helping on the trade balance. So, but it's not a Soviet-American Cold War because the Soviet Union was not a big part of the world economy. Here, the US economies are so connected, and both are so connected to the world economy. And that's why I say this will be the biggest challenge for the new administration in Washington. The maps of the Middle East is very much about maps. When I was writing the book, I saw in the video ISIS operatives on the border between Iraq and Syria stomping on the sand, saying that with their feet, they were erasing the Sykes-Picot border, Sykes-Picot line. What is Sykes-Picot? It was a map that was drawn at the end of 1915, beginning of 1916, to think about what the post-war organization of the Middle East would be when there was no longer an Ottoman Turkish Empire. It went through iterations, but basically that and its subsequent follow-ons set up the state system that now exists in the Middle East. And that has been under continual assault ever since. Iran and its Revolutionary Guards are very much throughout the region, basically seeking to overturn the order and overturn the states. ISIS, of course, was exactly trying to do that. Al-Qaeda wanted to do that. So it's been a constant issue. So that's one part of the maps of the Middle East. The other is how do you map your way towards greater diversification, not being overly dependent on oil. And that's a challenge for a number of the countries in the region, is simply once the Nigerian finance minister, I said, what is the risk with oil? And the way she put it, it was the resource curse was the vulnerability of your economy to the fluctuations of oil prices going up and down, which is why in your portfolios, your own portfolios, you want to diversify, and the economy wants to diversify. But we can see that diversifying an economy, it's not easy. It's a big challenge. Abu Dhabi has made progress. They started earlier. Saudi Arabia has started later. But one of the things that also becomes clear, if you want to diversify your economy away from oil, it helps to have a lot of oil revenues. And when oil prices go down, that's a challenge. I have a chapter in the book called The Plague about what happened when COVID struck the oil market. And we had the price collapse, and everybody knows negative oil prices for a time. And I think we saw at that point how the oil market had really changed. Dominated by the big three, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. And the United States, the Trump administration was the one that really brokered the deal that stabilized the market and got oil up into that $40 to $50 range. We don't know how a new administration would act, but we've seen recently is that Saudi Arabia has now stepped forward as the kind of the key decision maker on world oil. We have a very new map in the Middle East, which is the peace treaty between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, which sort of in the United States got lost because of the campaign, because of COVID, because of forest fires, but is a very significant development for the future. Speaking of the future, the next part I talked about was the roadmap of the future and the shift that is going on in transportation. I talked, in the book, I was conversations with J.B. Straubel, who was the person at that lunch in the early 2000s with Elon Musk, who put on the table after Musk said he wasn't interested in talking about an electric airplane. And JB, as he explained to me, to quote him, he said, we had this harebrained idea that we could use what were then basically only laptop cells and power a car. Not taken very seriously. Sure taken seriously today. We see a radical reshaping of transportation potentially happening. But I do want to point out, this is not the first time EVs were there. And if I can have the next photograph. Nope. Can you go back? Can you go back to, can you go to Edison? I think, sorry, we had it in the wrong place. So there's Thomas Edison with his electric car. He spent a lot of time and money on it. And in fact, in 1900, there were more electric cars in New York City than there were gasoline-powered cars. But along came Henry Ford, the Model T, mass manufacturing. And in that first battle between electric cars and gasoline cars, the gasoline cars won. But now we're in 2021, and you see the automakers very much shifting their investment towards electric cars. Quite dramatically, we see governments putting bans on saying you won't be able to sell internal combustion engines after 2035. And so this adjustment is going on. Now, how fast it happens and how much money government wants to put in it, and whether mines, instead of having 6 charging points, will have hundreds of charging points paid for under the $2 trillion Biden's climate plan, we'll see. But on EVs, the view we have in a very aggressive scenario is that by 2050, and we have about 800 automobile researchers in IHS Markit, is that by 2050, about half the world's auto fleet will be EVs. But here's where I do offer a different vision. If you combine ride-hailing, EVs, and self-driving cars, then you could have a very different kind of automobile industry, the biggest disruption of the business model since, really since Henry Ford. And I call it auto tech, at least the phrase that I came to use it. So let me turn now to the last map, which is climate map. Morgan, if you want to put up that photo you had up just a moment ago. There it is. There's December 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement. And I said, from a viewpoint of climate and energy, there are 2 eras. There's before Paris, before this picture, and after Paris. And we are now 5 years after Paris, after that moment. And we've seen that the goals that have come out of Paris have been embedded now in government policy. It's one of the 4 priorities for the Biden administration, in company strategies and decisions by investors. And so we're really in an era of energy transition. Although putting on an economic historian hat, I go out on a limb and say the energy transition actually began in 1709 when an English metal worker named Abraham Darby figured out that you could make iron in a more effective way using coal rather than wood. And we've had transitions ever since in energy, but they take time. Oil discovered in 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. It wasn't until the 1960s that oil overtook coal as the world's #1 energy resource. So it takes time. So what we really see going on with the net zero carbon is trying to speed up and have an energy transition in 30 years to transform an economy, the foundations of an economy that today is this almost $90 trillion economy that is 80% powered by fossil fuels, and make a change. How hard will it be to do? I think the what of trying to get to that target is a lot clearer than the how of how they get there. And places like mines will be very important in that. It's a big job, and things do take time. Wind and solar are 50-year-old modern industries. If I can have Martin Green's picture up, that would be great. Some of you will recognize him. There he is, where he talked about photovoltaics being almost magical in terms of taking sunlight and turning it into electricity. But his career is interesting. I think, and Morgan will know this because I think you studied with him, uh, his whole career has been in solar, and that's a 50-year career to get to where we are today. The first 40 years were not, wind and solar were not competitive. Now they're extremely competitive. It takes time. And I think that that an technology, which we don't know finally what shape it will take, that will be critical will be carbon capture, because we're going to continue to use a lot of oil and gas. And I don't know, I think people at Mines would have an idea about this, but kind of conceptually, I say maybe carbon capture is where solar and wind were in the 1990s. It's going to take time to figure out how to make it work. There's another big question, which is supply chains for net zero carbon, and a couple of comments about that. We will move from an era just of talking about big oil, which they love to have in headlines, to big shovels, a lot of mining. And Morgan there at the Payne Institute and colleagues is doing extremely important work on the supply chains for net zero carbon, something we're working on at IHS Markit too. But the work that Mines is doing is really, along with the work that it's doing on emissions, people look to it as the gold standard in terms of the work. But supply chains are not only economic, they have been about economy, about efficient technology, but I think they're going to become more political, particularly where energy transition, geopolitics, and the changing situation between the US and China comes to the fore. I think it's going to get more complicated. China, of course, has a very important position in the supply chains. The third point to make is I think we're going to see there are big goals for investment in energy transition, but there are going to be very big costs for dealing with COVID and post-COVID. And even on the front pages, if you look at it, you see much discussion about the size and scale of debt. And so I think there's going to be tension in governments as to where they spend money. I think just a couple of other points to make is that I think energy transition has more than one meaning. It has one meaning if you're in the Netherlands. It has a very different meaning if you're in India. And I have a section in the book on that. And I've been on the energy think tank for the government of India on what they're doing. And for them, energy transition is multiple track, because the World Health Organization, which Joe Biden yesterday said the United States is rejoining, has said that the biggest environmental problem in the world is indoor air pollution, which comes from cooking with wood, with animal waste, with crop waste. It said that almost 3 billion people, 35–40% of world population, does that. Huge environmental problem, big impact on health, big impact on mortality. So for an India, doesn't have the options that a rich country like the Netherlands has. For India, and I've heard this very explicitly from Prime Minister Modi, who spoke at a conference that we did a couple of months ago, is that India also sees commercial energy, oil and natural gas, as being part of the solutions. And in fact, India has a $60 billion project right now to build out a natural gas infrastructure. And I think the developing countries are not going to let the health needs, their economic development needs, be simply dictated by people, let's say in the Netherlands, who are in a very different position and live in rich countries. Well, in conclusion, I think I'd just like to say, and I thought about this, is writing this, I thought about all the surprises that have happened since 2000 in terms of negative things, 2001, the financial crisis, positive things, huge developments in technology, and we're in, we'll see what the impact of digitalization is on how work has changed. And I think, as we all know, that one consequence is the border between work and non-work has gotten much more permeable, and there's not a clear ending. There's no longer that border when you drive home from work. So I think there'll be a lot more changes ahead, but there are, I think, three big constants that I take away from writing the new map. One is climate and how to deal with it will be front and center. Secondly, assuring the energy that modern societies and developing countries need. And the third is this clash of nations that's in the title. As I say, China, US is the number one issue facing the Biden administration. There may be a honeymoon period, but even on some of the congressional testimony this week, you wonder about that. But I think the clash of nations is something, along with climate, along with energy needs, will be there. And I think the clamor of that clash of nations is likely to grow somewhat louder. So thank you, Morgan, and let me turn it back to you.
And thank you so much. That's an absolutely magnificent tour of the map of energy, and those 3 points of climate and development and clash of nations or geopolitics are terrific takeaways for us and can help us guide our work. We appreciate that. We have about 450 or 500 people watching us today, and while I would love to have questions from all of them for you, we are distilling the questions for Dr. Yergin. We really appreciate your time and listening, and while we won't get to all the questions, hopefully you can get inklings of them through the talk and through some of these others. So Dan, maybe just to start with the most topical piece. Yesterday, President Biden put out a slew of executive orders that had to do with climate and energy. What are your thoughts about how the new administration is going to approach the energy and climate space, and what kind of changes they'll be able to make?
I think it's very clear, and he said it in his inaugural address, climate is one of the four priorities of his administration. You can see in terms of the people who are being appointed to jobs that it's a priority. You saw it certainly in terms of those executive orders yesterday. And doesn't mix the metaphors. They want to step on the gas in terms of climate initiatives. And they will focus on infrastructure as one way to do it, infrastructure spending. Another way will be regulation, of course, rejoining Paris, with John Kerry as the climate envoy, putting the United States back at the forefront of climate discussions. So I think all of that will unfold. The new Secretary of Energy has been a strong advocate of electric vehicles. So I think all of those things will happen. Clearly, it's a question of, well, what about this industry, the conventional energy industries? And I think during the campaign, then candidate Joe Biden said, I will not ban fracking. Let me repeat, I will not ban fracking. Now, of course, it's not clear that he would have had the authority, president would have the authority to do that anyway. But I think that this is an important, very important segment of the economy. If he wants the economy to recover, these industries and the jobs that go with them are very important. And I think he's a foreign policy person. And so I think he will recognize that and the economic significance. The state of New Mexico, I think it gets 40% of its revenues, pays its teacher and health workers from royalties. So I think the industry will continue. We'll see what they do on new export requirements. There will be more regulation. There will be a focus on something that you all focus on methane. And we'll see what the nature of the regulations are. And I think the other thing that just to keep in mind is that there's a very strong impetus to drive there. But I think you heard him yesterday. What was the single biggest theme is unity. This is a very divided country. And, he needs to connect across the country. So I think that will be part of the considerations as well.
Terrific. Yeah. So it's certainly exciting to see, and Yeah, that's so that's of your three pieces, Dan. There's a question on the sort of climate aspect or some of the climate and energy. If we move to the development or the developing economies, what are the important trends do you see shaping emerging and developing energy markets going forward?
Well, I think the number one thing is growth. I think that a lot of questions. I wouldn't generalize. I would be very cautious of generalizing. We're still in COVID fog about how demand will be changed. Uh, you know, Probably oil demand will be back to where it was in 2019 by the spring of 2022, and I think continues to grow on the basis of population growth and emerging markets. Uh, you know, Oil demand probably at least till the kind of 2030 or sometime after that before we see a peak, but a changing mix. But I think for countries, I have a quote in the book from the Nigerian energy minister specifically saying that, we have, what do they have, 200 million people in Nigeria. We know what, Brussels wants to say, but we have a lot of poor people. We have to get natural gas to them to bring them into the modern world. So I think there is a divergence between how things may look in Brussels and how they look in Nigeria or New Delhi or other emerging market countries where there's just different imperative where growth is also very important. So I think all these countries will engage. India is a good example in the sense that it has very aggressive targets for wind and solar, but it also has targets, aggressive targets for using more natural gas in its economy.
Yeah, terrific insights. Thanks, Dan. So we started with the climate, then developing countries, and then there's sort of two groups of related questions, if you don't mind, about that geopolitical map and some of the work we've done says, the pace of change matters and the new map changes different, makes new relationships. So where do you see the future of, say, oil exporting countries in the Middle East or otherwise who are dependent on the oil revenues in this changing map? How are they going to navigate the new energy transitions?
Well, I think Abu Dhabi is mentioned briefly as a case study. At the beginning of the century, their economy was almost totally, their GDP was almost totally based upon oil. Today, 60% of their GDP is non-oil, but that's a small country. It was easier to do. Um, I think Saudi Arabia is a much larger country, and it's challenging to do it because diversification is not only about saying it, it's about culture, it's about laws, it's about contracts, it's about value systems, and those things don't change easily overnight. And so I think it's for a number of countries, it is a challenge, but just from a portfolio point of view, you want to be diversified. And when a lot of money is flowing in, it's kind of easy to let it slip. And then when not a lot of money is flowing in, you want to really accelerate it, but not a lot of money is flowing in, so it becomes more difficult.
Yeah, and that's exactly the basis of much of the work we were doing when I was at the World Bank with these countries around diversifying the economies. And as you say, the United Arab Emirates it was always held up as the way to consider it. So Dan, just to sort of come back to some of those climate and investment issues. The other a few weeks ago we saw a $7 billion LNG contract canceled between Engie and the French with LNG coming out of the Permian Basin in Texas or coming through the Gulf. How do you see that developing? In other words, the concern over environmental considerations impacting on the oil and gas markets
Yeah.
in the United
Well,
States, export
that
markets.
was very significant. The reasons, we don't know what was happening behind the curtain because it involved two French companies. Uh, uh, but I think there's contention coming between countries. You've seen, on the other hand, LNG uh, uh, carbon neutral LNG shipments where people are going to do offsets, which is going to be part of what carbon captures or carbon offsets will be a very important thing. And you can see companies moving in that direction. I think that the US industry uh, will need to demonstrate that it's dealing with methane, uh, and it has done a great job. I saw the other day that methane is down 70% or some number like that, but that's not what the French think. So, it's going to be both actions and doing it, I think. And one thing that I think is going to be contentious and controversial is this notion of border taxes, where countries, the EU wants to, it's in its program to to tax uh, imports if they don't have the same policies that Europe has. I think that's going to be pretty contentious because Europe also actually really needs to sell things to China. So trade is a two-way street. So, and I think it's possible that at least has been in some of the Biden program to talk about using border taxes in the United States. I think it's going to be really controversial, and it's not clear that you can do it in terms of the World Trade Organization.
Well, thank you, Dan. I think we will hold there to keep on time, and we're terribly grateful for your time and insights. If those online haven't read it yet, the new map is a terrific guide to what's happening and what might happen. And as others have said, including I guess Bill Gates, no one better to turn to than Daniel Yergin for these issues. So to all of you who joined us, we're terribly grateful for that. We have other excellent speakers coming up in our Global Energy Future Initiative over the next weeks and months. A highlight for me is one of my old bosses, who's now the Minister of Climate Change and Transport in Ireland, will be speaking next month, and we have other great speakers, but certainly none better than today's. And so, thank you all for attending and joining us. Please,
and Morgan,
Dan.
let me say too, thank you to you, to the Payne Institute, to the school, and certainly to Paul, and to everybody in the Mines community. It really meant a lot to me when I got that honorary degree back in 2008, and it's very significant for me to come back now and talk about this project, which has been so close to my heart. So I appreciate joining you all, and I obviously wish everybody well, and I certainly look forward to the opportunity to be back on campus, not virtually, but for real. So thank you for you all very much, and delighted to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Paul, do you want the last word, or are we okay? Well, thank you. And it's been a pleasure, Dan, and being in touch. And thank you again so much. And thanks to all who joined us.